This is Still Here, Still Queer Now What, your companion to queer midlife. I'm Dr. Paul Taylor-Pitt. I'm the author of Still Here, Still Queer Now What, the book, coming everywhere 21st of October. My guest on the podcast this week is incredible. I did it. I found a word. I'm quite happy with myself about that because I was thinking, how do I sum them up in a single word? And I hadn't realized that incredible was the word that was going to come out of my mouth. So I'm going to stick with that. CJ De Barra is incredible. Another word I was going to use, because I was going to try and sum them up in a single word. And the word that I kept coming back to, which I struggle with the word, but the word that I kept coming back to was authentic. And the reason I struggle with authentic as a word is that people often try to be authentic. And I think as soon as you try to be authentic, you're not being authentic, you're performing something. Whereas CJ De Barra, to me, embodies authenticity. We had such an amazing conversation. CJ, as you'll discover, has so many different facets to themselves. And I was so happy to be able to spend an hour with CJ exploring. I think we just scratched the surface. Although the conversation was incredibly deep, I think we actually scratched the surface. I finished the conversation wanting more. I know you will too. CJ is a journalist, an author, a historian, an all-round incredible person. So that's all I'm going to say, because there's so much to come and you're going to hear it from CJ. So I'm going to ask CJ, as I ask all my guests, like, who are you meeting today?
Oh my goodness, where do I start? So, my name is CJ De Barra. I am and now let me get the list out. So, I'm non-binary, lesbian, neurodivergent. I have a lovely mix of autism, ADHD, and oppositional defiance disorder. For just to really round off the experience, yeah, I have a little bit of that. I'm an author, a journalist, and 4 years ago, I set up the Knots Queer History Archive. And recently, I've become a student again for the first time in 20 years. So I am, as a 41-year-old, navigating going back to school.
Are you loving it?
It's been a minute. Like I've been trying to work out how I feel.
Yeah.
Like it's so odd having to relearn all the, because when you go from like, BA, PhD, whatever, you have all those sort of working muscles and memory and everything still going. But when you take a huge break, you're like, how do I take notes? What is a Gantt chart? You know,
Who is research?
I don't even know where I am. So yeah, it's fun, but I think interesting.
I remember that in my undergraduate degree, like I just used it as a reason to leave Scotland. Like I didn't really care what I studied or where I went, as long as it was in London. And so I think gradually over time, I just went to less and less lectures. But I remember the mature students, they would always sit on the front and they would be like there with their note, and I just used to think, you suck ups. And I am that person now. Like I really miss studying. And I think that's why I've ended up writing, because I love researching. I love interviewing people. I love writing about it. Like I loved my doctorate. And I think that younger version of me would hate me because I'm the person sitting at the front with the notes going, give it to me.
I was exactly the same. I had no time for mature students to put the hand up at the end of class when you were all dying to leave. And it was always a mature student who had like proper questions that they
Yeah.
wanted answered. And
Yeah.
I'm just sitting there going, I just want to go and get like, get a beer on the grass with my friends. And now it's me, and most of my questions are, how do I make this technology work? But yeah, it's the landscape has changed completely. But I think I'm loving the effect that it's having on me, actually, to be honest.
Okay. And what's that?
I feel like, I mean, I did a art degree, specializing in performance art, one of the most employable degrees you can spend 4 years doing. And I came out of that and I was like, right, the last thing I want to do is anything to do with art. I do not want to look at art. I do not want to create art. I do not want any art in my vicinity. And it's taken, I mean, what, 15, 20 years for me to I mean, I go to art shows. I didn't cut it out entirely, but I stopped creating art and I fell into writing. I became a journalist, I became an author, but I stopped painting, I stopped performing, I stopped sculpting, I stopped doing all of that stuff. And finally, I bought my first sketchbook again for the first time in 15, 20 years and started drawing and started like very almost shyly taking those steps back into being an artist. And I think actually just hearing myself say that for the first time, that is, I've not used that word since. I don't even know if I used it in art college because I was an art student. I wasn't
Yeah.
an artist. I wasn't practicing. I know I wasn't selling. Yeah. So that's been really nice to rediscover things like that.
Not an artist, or at least not in the traditional sense, or whatever that means. But I feel like if you're making work, then you're an artist. You don't need anyone to confer the title on you or to give you a badge that says I'm an artist. And also what I love in what you said is, you were an artist who became a journalist, became an author, almost like it happened to you rather than you decided one day, I'm moving into journalism. Like, was there a moment where you thought, that's it, I'm a journalist now?
God, I mean, I'm a very big fan of doing things the wrong way. I worked this out the other day because I've done the exact same thing with moving. I'm sort of moving into my next stage of my career, which is moving into the archive and history space. And I've done exactly the same thing again. I've gone and got the experience first and then gone in and gone, shit, I need a qualification of some sense, degree, whatever, research, whatever. So in my final years of art college, I started writing a blog. And you have to remember, like, I'm old as the hills. So, this was at a time where there were not a lot of blogs. There was not a lot of online stuff. You couldn't, Instagram was, but I don't know if we had Twitter at that point. I can't remember what year I actually started, but it was really early. And at that time, Ireland was going through an exceptionally severe recession. We had bailouts. There were no jobs. There was no funding. There was nothing. And I was very aware that you know, it was tough going into art college in 2004 because, you know, there was, there were not a queue of people waiting to take on artists. So I was already in an area where I knew I need to make more money. And I think all of us, when we were about to graduate in 2008, we knew what we were going out into the world into because the economy had just collapsed. So everyone I knew was going on to do a master's. They were going to do like retraining. And I mean, how depressing is that? You've come out of 3, 4 years of your degree and already you're going, shit, I've made a mistake here. I'm going to have to. So I went and applied for a journalism degree, master's, and got in. But I still remember the interview where they did not know what to do with the fact that I had a blog. They were so confused by it. They were just like, oh, because at that point you still had to do all the traditional stuff like I had to do shorthand. We had to do magazine layout. We had to do, video. And when I say video, this wasn't a pick up your phone and point situation. This was an old school camcorder up, that whole vibe. And yeah, they were sort of, but what they realized was that my blog had kind of started in Limerick in art school and then had sort of taken on a life of its own when I got to Dublin. So it was like the universities may have been behind the times, but the PR people were not. So I went from being like a student to being at these sort of fancy parties, at press releases, being treated like a journalist, even though I have no qualifications. I run a blog. Today, I hate the fact that that would probably be referred to as influencer, but we didn't have that. We didn't have that at the time. We were just like, we were just trying it out.
It's fascinating to me to hear that, because almost in a way it's like you're archiving yourself by placing yourself in a particular moment in time of switching from one kind of technology to another. Because I feel like I'm 11, 12 years older than you. So I feel like I've been through maybe one of those transitions before, where it was like, I remember in my degree going from my first assignment being handwritten to, by the end of my degree, actually being in the university library with a computer. And I had an email address, and no one had an email address, because, I remember buying .NET magazine because it was a list of websites. Like there were so few websites that you could buy them all in a magazine and flick through them and go, oh, look, there's one on this. And so to then see, someone in your generation who came out of studying at that time when people were going, what's a blog? And now you're back in academia again. And I don't know, how different does it feel now to be experiencing it through the lens of, actually, if you wanted to, you could probably just get AI to do all the work for you.
God, we have not got hours to talk about how I feel about AI, because
Give me the headline. Just what is it? Just in general, like what's your take?
dismay, sadness, because so if I go back to, going into journalism, and I, unfortunately, I started at the time where the industry was being absolutely decimated. It wasn't just about that there is a recession. It is the fact that, the industry does not know what to do with the online thing. And at that point, they are calling us citizen journalists. They are talking about the 24-hour news cycle. They do not know how to handle it. And as a result, I mean, there's a lot of problems anyway, because all of the media, it's similar to here, all of the media ever created is in Dublin, or like here, it's London. And if you are outside of that, it's very, very difficult. So I come from West Cork. I'm very much a proud culture, which is our word for sort of living outside Dublin, essentially. And there weren't people like me working on radio stations in particular, because I remember somebody in the office in the newsroom in my master's saying to me that, like, my accent was fairly neutral, and that would be really good for me, because what that means is I didn't have a strong West Cork accent, so I would find it easier to get into radio. But so unfortunately, going into journalism at that point, I entered yet another industry. I'd just left art. I've gone into another industry that's on its knees, and I hung on throughout the online thing. I hung on when everyone was going, oh, it's video only, YouTubers are replacing blogs. No one wants to read anymore. I hung on through that. I hung on through the social media thing. And then I moved into archiving and being a queer historian, and went back to university at a time that is really not good for, if you look at how many cuts are happening across the university sector, particularly in the arts, that in history departments are being decimated. And so I feel like I've yet again gone into another industry that's on its knees.
You're like the anti-Steve Jobs. Like, I remember Steve Jobs had that famous quote of, like, skate to where the puck is going, not where it's been. Whereas you kind of run into these burning industries going, it's on fire, I'm here. Let's see what we can do before it turns to ashes.
Yeah, I love me a burning industry. Like, if I can do 4 years in something, come out saddled with debt, and, with no job prospects, I am delighted.
Yeah. Another burned bridge. Goodbye. But also, I think that there's something like, and I already know that we're going to run out of time because I want to ask you so many things. So I'm just going to give us permission to just talk about whatever we want to. I still want to hear about AI. But if I go back to the very beginning of how you introduced yourself, non-binary, lesbian, neurodivergent, like, when I looked at your website, there are 3 words on there, but it's not those 3 words. It's, journalist, author, historian. And those words came as you were describing yourself, but they came quite late. And so I wonder where, in terms of at 41, where is your, like, what's being foregrounded and what's in the background at the moment? Because on one hand, you've got this very, the kind of professional, journalist, author, historian, and then the very personal, non-binary, lesbian, neurodivergent. And yet, in my experience of you, that they are so enmeshed, like you can't separate them.
They aren't separate at all. I feel like everything I do is bound in with those, with those particular identities. And I'm proud of it. I really am proud of it. It's a difficult mix at the moment because I'm very proud of all of my identities. I've fought very, very hard to figure all of them out. Just because I was diagnosed at 10 with ADHD doesn't mean that I was ever told anything about it or made to feel comfortable or, had it explained in a positive way. And same with trying to figure out gender, sexuality, all the rest of it. Yeah, it's been a mix. I would say my professional career has been predominantly centered around all of my identities. So, I've worked in disability awareness. I've worked in, I've written a book about neuroqueerness, sex, love, and relationships. I've talked about being non-binary and trying to start a family, all of these things. I've been very, very, very public. But I think from a professional standpoint, I never know if people prefer to kind of know me, then know that, or whether they want to know that and then they want to see how they can hire me. I don't know. So it's interesting.
Who do you think completely gets you?
God. I mean, probably my wife and my cat. And I know that's cliche, but we are very, very cliche. But I think between the two of them, they probably know me the best. And I think my dad as well, but I think sometimes my dad can, not understand the gay thing or the non-binary thing or like, what I do for a living. Because it's so weirdly, yeah. I think my mum was a bit the same like that as well.
Is he curious?
About those things.
Does he ask questions about them, or is he okay being in a place of not understanding, but doesn't then try and change that?
I think there's a limit. I think we lost my mum in 2024. And I think, my dad is very different as a person on the other side of that. And I mean, he had myself, my wife got married in his garden. So he had a big like lesbian wedding in his garden. So he's very supportive and, couldn't be happier to, he didn't have to travel anywhere. The wedding came to him. So, and we cleaned up after ourselves as well. So he was delighted.
Absolutely.
But then I think when we get into sort of the complexities of language in particular, I think sometimes that can be a little bit difficult. And that's not him going, I don't agree with it. It's him going so complicated and not knowing where to start. And through my archive, I spend a lot of time working with older people and, going into care homes and all the rest of it. And that is quite common. And it doesn't come from a place of, wanting to be difficult or not supportive or anything. It comes from a place of it is so, people haven't had those conversations. They haven't had the sit down, the chats, all the rest of it. And people are afraid of saying the wrong thing and, but they're coming from such a place of, I want to know more, but I'm afraid to ask in case that's the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, which is so tough, isn't it? It's like, do I remain uninformed at risk of potentially asking a question that someone could take offense at? Or do I risk offending someone by staying uninformed? And in the end, it's like, well, if someone's going to be offended, I'd rather offend them with a question than silence. And it's how to give people the permission to do that without then, becoming the kind of, okay, here I am, the roving educator of people. Roll up, ask me a question about being non-binary. It's like, how do you then protect your own peace? It's complicated.
It's capacity. You cannot educate people if you have not got the energy and capacity to do it, because it is exhausting. It is full on. People will ask you the weirdest of questions and expect you to be completely ready. Like, I'm also adopted and I'm fairly open about that. And like, but honestly, people I have just met, if they find out, well, I don't, believe, weirdly, it might come up in conversation because people will be like, you don't look like your sister or you don't look like your parents. And it's like, well, I'm adopted. And it's not meant in a way to be like, oh my God, scandal, drama. It's just like, no, that's a normal part of who I am as a person and how my family operates. But people will turn around and go, have you ever wanted to meet your birth parents? And I'm like, girl, we just met at the bar 5 minutes ago. Do you know what I mean? Like, chill out.
That's your first question.
You're leading with that. So yeah, it's not. I don't know, but yeah, I think this educational thing. Like, I mean, I've always come from a point of view of I will chat away to absolutely anybody, but I have an excessive amount of energy and hyperactivity. And I work in the educational kind of thing of I go and I give talks. I've worked as a disability awareness trainer for the last 3 years. So I'm used to chatting, but there are days where I go like to ground and I have, because I'm autistic as well. I got diagnosed at the start of this year, and it's taken me a while to recognize that sometimes after those big days of explaining, I need to go and crawl into bed and just be there for a little bit and not talk to anyone. So if you ask me to explain what it feels like to use they them pronouns on a day where I'm hiding in bed watching the biggest amount of shite on telly, I'm not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. I would love to have an opportunity one day to pretend I'm like a West End actor and just wear a sign that says I'm on vocal rest, because they get away with it. They can do that and people will go, okay, I won't interrupt you then. I would love to just have one of those signs just all the time.
Imagine what you could get away with. You could just, I mean, to be honest with you, I'm such a foghorn sort of like loudmouthy person that I think even I would last 5 minutes wearing a sign that says I'm on vocal rest.
Well, you could have it two-sided. The other side goes, just kidding. But then at least you can show it when you fancy at the time. And I guess the other thing is you are interesting. Like, you are so interesting because of all of those different things, all of the aspects of you. Like, I often wrestle with this idea of, and particularly since going self-employed a few years ago, like, I feel like I just keep adding hyphens. It's like, yes, I'm a consultant, I'm a coach, I'm a facilitator, I'm an author, I'm a whatever, and I just keep adding them. And not that many people ask, or if they do ask, they're not usually that interested anyway. But it's the usual thing of like getting in a taxi and they go, oh, what are you doing? What do you do? And sometimes I just say, I'm an accountant, because they go, okay. Whereas if I say, well, right now I'm focused more on my book, which is coming out, and then I've got a podcast and I'm doing, and they just go, I didn't really mean to spark that. You didn't have to tell me that. But with you, you've got so many different things that I guess other people are just not that interesting. And so I can see why they would want to just kind of draw those things out of you, because you're all of those things and not done yet either.
It's hard. I struggle with the fact that I have so many things because I also have like rampant imposter syndrome where I'm like, at what point do I get to comfortably use the word? And I think for a long time, because I wasn't, a full-time journalist in like one of the big, huge papers, I felt like, oh, am I allowed to say I'm a journalist, or is that being, is that a bit of a lie or what? Even though I am doing whatever it was at the time, I worked in a shop, but I had a radio show on a local station. I had like I'd work going to cover a general election for like News Talk in Ireland, and I'd still go, I don't know if I'm allowed to call myself a journalist. And it's funny
As you're standing interviewing someone with a press pass.
exactly that, and I still But as I've moved into the history thing, I've done exactly the same with the word historian. And I find myself calling myself a radical historian, or sort of putting the word down and going, I hope people don't mind. But then, at what point are you allowed to call yourself that? Because I've written two, well, actually three history books. The third one's not out yet. I've been running an archive for genuinely 4 years. Like, what more can I do? So
I
yeah,
always
it's
tell the
weird.
story of this amazing artist I met in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. She was like an artist in residence, and we got talking. She was amazing. She used to be a nurse, and she was now a sculptor. And we had this conversation where she was like, when can I call myself an artist? And I said, well, you are in the Museum of Modern Art making art. Who's
That
going to tell you
qualifies.
you're not? It's the same thing. Like, here I am interviewing someone with a press pass. Am I a journalist? I sometimes, or more recently, I've been thinking about it because like my first degree was in psychology, but I've never like registered as a clinical psychologist. I never did that. But I could call myself a psychologist. But then to me, I would feel like a fraud because then I'd be like, but I'm not a psychologist. But it's like, I have a degree in psychology. It's the same thing. It's like, what are we waiting for? Like, whose permission are we waiting for to come in the room and tap us on the shoulder and go, yeah, you can now call yourself that thing? Because I know that as soon as someone said to me, you can't call yourself that thing, I would go, yeah, watch me.
Absolutely. And I think having this sort of multiple titles thing is very much a of our sort of generation thing, because, my dad was an architect and that was what he was. And he he didn't have like architect slash this slash that slash, do you know what I mean? But I didn't have the opportunity to just do one thing because, I ended up in a creative industry where there is not that much job security. And I emigrated to England because there were no jobs. I tried to make journalism work in Ireland as long as I could. God, the amount of gigs I did that were badly paid and not paid, I should add. And in the end, sort of went, Ireland, it's too bad. And left in 2012, which was actually statistically the worst year of emigration since the recession in 1983. So, that's that actually, yeah, it was, but
It's like another burning thing. Let me run towards.
mhm. So I had to, yeah, I didn't have a choice. I had to have multiple things. And I think anybody now as well, we have to do, it's not enough to just have the writing anymore. And I remember at one point, being so envious of people that were in journalism pre 2007, 2008, where they filed copy. They got the idea, they did the thing, they filed the copy, and they left. So I would have to get the story, get get it done, get it written up, and then that goes through. I then have to edit it when it comes back from the editor because, surprise, surprise, the sub editors no longer exist because, we don't have, the paper is trying to cut down on jobs. So then you have to do all the social media yourself. And then as time went on, you had to do the videos. So you had to do a reel, you had to do TikTok, you had to do YouTube, you had to promote your stories because if you didn't, your readership is how you get employment. So you have, what most people don't realize is you have figures. You have a statistic that you, or not statistic, a number that's plucked out of somewhere that you have to hit. And the higher up in the food chain you get, the more you become responsible for that number. So when you become an editor, you are responsible for every other person's numbers and your own and your newspaper. And if you're not doing all the promotional stuff, the networking, the constantly applying, the pitching, the going out to ask other editors if you can write to them, you know, you're only as good as your last byline.
I often think of the glory days when Asda had a policy that if there was more than two people in front of you at the checkout, they would open another one. And then you would get to the checkout and they would say, do you want some help with packing? And they would bring someone over and they would pack your shopping for you. And I, I don't dwell on it, but after a 12-hour day of doing all the things that you've just talked about, and I think, oh God, I forgot to feed myself today. And then I go to Tesco and it's like, oh, shall I just scan my own food and pack my own bag? It's like, my God. Then I sound like I'm just getting really whingy, but it's like, I remember reading an article when I was doing my doctorate, and it was about the history of organizational change and development and, stuff that no one cares about. But there was this article from the 70s that said, technology is becoming such a big deal that soon we will only have to work for 2 days a week. And I think, that person, I wish I could travel back in time and meet them and go, you're so wrong. Because technology means we're going to be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we're even going to have to pack our own fucking shopping in Tesco. And I just find the whole thing fascinating, because then all of those industries that you've gone into in the ashes of their demise, I see them in the organizations I work with. And I work in organizations that I would have always thought were really thriving. Like I work in record labels, I work in theater, I work in galleries. And then I also work with like traditional kind of retailers. Everyone is struggling. And so then I go, someone isn't. Someone is not struggling. Some industry must be doing well. And then I come back full circle and go, is it AI? Is everything just now being funneled into the pockets of 5 or 6 people in the world? And the rest of us are just kind of in this pyramid of shit where we're now working 24/7 and not really seeing an awful lot of the benefits of.
It's capitalism. It pure and simple. Like the machines were meant to make our jobs easier. We're meant to complement. We're meant to, help us. But instead, because of greed, because of capitalism, what's happened is they've replaced us. And we now have a situation where, we have billionaires in the world and the world is currently on fire. But, we have billionaires who are not doing anything to help the situation, but demanding that we work faster and faster and faster, to the point where some workers are peeing in bottles. I'm sure you can figure out which brand I'm referring to. Workers are peeing in bottles because they can't have a work break, and it's so incredibly fucked up. It is so
Hmm.
incredibly fucked up. And for all this talk about radical rest and stepping away, I'm really interested in this concept, but I just panic about how I would make that work, because we're all on such a conveyor belt of having to get faster and faster and faster and faster as the technology, you know, using quotation mark, improves. Um, where is this going to end? It is going to end up with, you know, all of us out of work, with
Yeah.
being, one or two exceptionally rich people in the world, and the rest of us just what?
That's the bit I don't understand. Or maybe I think I understand it, but I can't make sense of it. Because the more people who are replaced means there are fewer people who have any money to spend to make the people rich who are getting. And that's when I go, hang on, if we're getting rid of lots of people in the workplace, who's going to buy your shit? These are like, as well as workers, we are also consumers. We are the people who go and spend money on the things that people produce. And I just can't see how it's working. But then my brain just gets to a natural cul-de-sac and goes, okay, stop now. You don't know where you're going. You've gone into a dead end. Help me make sense of it. What do you think is the natural conclusion to this?
I mean, I wish I knew, to be fair. I really wish I knew, because I do something about it. But, I mean, it just seems to be an all time kind of, there seems to be something with post COVID, this really weird feeling of like things just not, we're not focused on each other. We're not focused on, we seem to be very divided. We seem to be very angry. We have a lot of like division in terms of like financial class, whether it just doesn't, it feels weird at the moment. It feels weird, and I'm not really sure that I can understand how it's going to finish, because something has to give. Something has to give. It has to.
I wondered if it was because of the Big Bang. Because if the universe is still expanding, is it just that there's now increasing distance between us? Like, did we go through some kind of wormhole that meant we feel further apart from each other, even though we are technically, some of us have the resources and the opportunity and the technology to be even more connected? But, and things like social media, you talk about the glory days of like having a blog. I remember when Twitter first came out, and I loved Twitter. I've got friends who I made on Twitter in the early days when we did tweet ups. And, they're coming up for like almost 20-year-long friendships. I wouldn't even go near it now. And it's similarly with things like Instagram. Instagram to me, I know it was a bit of a cliche, but it was like, here's what I'm having for breakfast. Whereas now I'm like, okay, I need to program in the next 7 days of posts because I've got to get content now. It's like, fucking hell. Even that fun thing has become work. It's become part of the job. I don't know. So where do you go for fun?
Read. I take myself offline entirely. I read. And that's one of the best parts about going back to university and doing the PhD is it's giving me, like, I'm getting paid to read, which is weird because I would have done that shit for free. Don't tell me. But genuinely, like, I am surrounded by books. I buy books constantly. I go to the library constantly. But also film as well. I'm a huge consumer of like just arts, I think. That's more to rather than any particular type of arts. I just consume as much creative stuff as I can because, for that 3 hours that you're at a ballet or a play or reading a book or watching a film or whatever, you are just transported away from the shit. It is generally frowned upon to pick up your phone and start texting or Instagramming or something if you're in the middle of a performance. And I think that, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I have always, from a young age, been into the arts. My mother raised me on that. But I think now as an adult, I retreat into it so much more than ever because it's a genuine, legitimate thing for me to just walk away from the phone.
I've got two questions that are kind of burning in my mind, and I don't mind which one we go with or neither. So could I ask them both? And then if one of them catches your attention, you think, actually, I'd love to talk about that, we go with that. And if not, we just go with something else. But two things that I'm really curious about. One is around archiving, which to me feels, as someone who doesn't really understand what archiving is, I'm fascinated by it. And I think it's like you're doing almost like a librarian plus, like you are creating and curating something which is so vital. And so I'm fascinated by that and how you got into it. And the other thing that I'm curious about, and it might not be of interest to you because you're living it, but I'm curious about, it's quite rare to talk to someone who was diagnosed with ADHD as a child because so many more adults are now being diagnosed. And then when you said you had your autism diagnosis this year, I'm wondering, in terms of you and your, embracing yourself and adding all of these kind of slashes and who you are, did being diagnosed with ADHD young and autism later, like, did that come as a surprise or what? I don't know. So many people, I guess, I'm meeting now are being diagnosed together in adulthood, whereas you had, 30 years of getting used to an ADHD diagnosis and then in your 40s going, oh, look, autism, hello. So any of those or neither?
I'll go with the ADHD one. So, I mean, it's really weird that I was diagnosed so young because when you consider that was 1996, it was West Cork, which is not at that point and still probably today is not like the most, it's not the epicenter of getting a neurodivergent anything. But my mum was really, my mum knew something was going on. So was very adamant about getting me tested for ADHD. Well, for anything, basically. She needed help. And she was like, I don't know what's going on, but something's going on. And she, at one point refused to leave a doctor's surgery until I was referred. So she was an amazing woman. But at that point, once I had the ADHD diagnosis, that was it. They weren't going to look for anything else. They said, right, you've got ADHD and you've got oppositional defiance disorder, which is, what I call the side dish that goes along with ADHD for some of us.
I haven't heard
Well,
of it. And again, you don't have to explain it to me because I can Google it. But if it's useful to kind of talk about how it complements what the side dish adds to the main flavor.
I think for me, it vibes along with the rejection issues that I have with ADHD and not being able to kind of process authority and kind of almost like the way things are done, like the levels of authority, if that makes sense. So I can come across as very defiant and very all or nothing, very I have a wicked temper when I get going. So, and I don't know as much about it as I do my ADHD because for years I was always that was the big focus was, you know, there's a misconception, I think, certainly, among the community of people that were diagnosed later in life of believing that we somehow had all the answers from a young age because we got our diagnosis really young. And that's not the case at all. We were basically like, told, my mum was told, oh yeah, they've got ADHD. And then, bye, back
That
out into the
explains
world.
it. Good luck with the rest of your life.
Have fun. So it was touch and go whether or not I would get into college, whether I'd pass my exams, whether, they had no idea what they were facing into because we were the Ritalin generation, like nobody knew what
Mm.
to do with us because it wasn't discussed. That's not to say that it didn't exist before 1996 because it very much did. But the idea was at that point you could not be autistic and ADHD. It was the two cancelled each other out. So if you were one, you couldn't be the other. And then in 2013, that changed, and actually the psychologists, scientists, whoever said actually you can have both. And not only that, they go together really, really well, and lots of people have both. So
So there
that
is someone who comes in and taps you on the shoulder and goes, you can be that. It's like, actually, they're the people we'd be waiting for finally.
you were autistic all along. I was like, "Ah, no one
And
saw
now
that
we
plot."
confer that title on you as well.
But you know how I figured it out? And it's not through, it's probably a weird way of figuring it out, but I got so when COVID happened, lots of people, our routines, our lives totally changed. But I think for neurodivergent people, our support systems collapsed because I was going to the gym constantly to deal with the fact that I had a high level of hyperactivity that I needed to get out of my system. So what do? You go to the gym, you've done like however many hours of journalism, then you've got to go and do all the hours on the treadmill to get that kind of nervous energy out. So obviously you couldn't do that when COVID happened. So I was going through a huge breakup at that point as well. And I decided I need to know more about how this is affecting my life because at that point, not having all my coping mechanisms, not having my partner at the time, I started to just completely and utterly disintegrate into nothing. And I wrote Neuroqueer. I wrote a book about, I mean, sex and relationships ultimately, but the whole first chapter is about me coming to terms with how it's impacted my life as like talking about journalism, talking about going to college, all of first loves, all of these kind of like totally you know normal things. But as I was writing the book, and then I became a disability awareness trainer, I started traveling around the UK and Ireland talking about what it was like to be neurodivergent, talking about sex, talking about, pretty much anything to do with it. And I started to realize, hang on a minute, there are behaviors here that don't fit into ADHD. I have, there are bits that don't quite gel. And I kind of mulled it over for ages and then read, right, okay, I'm going to try and get assessed for autism and I'm going to try and see what happens here. And look, worst thing they could say is no, right? And yeah, I went for the autism assessment and it was like ding, 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 all the little lights going on. And it was not a shock at all. Because I think,
Do
at
you
the
mean
time,
worst thing they could say is no, as in they would say no to an assessment, or worst thing they could say is no, you're not autistic?
yeah, no, you're not autistic. I mean, that's fine. That's grand. Tell me I'm not so that I can cross that off the list and we can move on, because, and I think part of that is being menopausal as well. The coping mechanisms had gone yet again. So even though COVID was, we were back out into the world, it's still, I was very aware that there's things here that don't quite, things aren't thinging. Don't regret going for that assessment at all. I think it was one of the best things I ever did for myself. I mean, I came out as autistic at 40, fuck it.
Are there things that you would love to discover about yourself between now and the next few decades that you think, like if you were to look back from the position of an 80-year-old, you'd go, oh, that explained it. Like, have you got hunches about what else is waiting to be discovered?
God, I don't know, because if you'd have asked me, when I was 30, if I was autistic or considering, going for an autism diagnosis, like I would have said, absolutely not. I've got ADHD. What are you talking about? But yeah, I'm excited to see what the future holds for me. What I will discover about myself. Because let's face it, like every single year, you think, oh, I've figured something else out about myself, and then next year you realize, oh shit, now there's this, and then there's this. So it's an ongoing process and work in progress. But I think I am the happiest and most settled I have been in the last you could not pay me to go back to my 20s. I am so happy with my life in terms of how it's who I am. And since I've come out as all of these things, came out as a lesbian, came out as non-binary, owned my neurodiversity, got my autism diagnosis. And yeah, I feel pretty good about all of those things. So let's see what, let's see what I come out with next.
So is there not even a figure? Like, I don't know who this magical time traveling billionaire is, but is there not a number that would make you go back to your 20s?
Okay, if you told me that I'm conflicted, because on the one hand, I'm like, if you told me it was for a limited time
Right.
and you
Okay.
could go back and experience, what you felt at 18, 19, 20, but it's only for like a week. It's only for a couple of hours, like maybe. But I need to
Like
know.
almost like you time travel back to that. And would you know that that's what had happened? Like you would wake up in this 18-year-old body and go, I'm 41. So you would know what had happened.
Well, this is the conundrum, because the other thing is the butterfly effect as well.
Mm,
So am I going back and it's a case of I can't touch anything or speak to anybody? Am I in my own body? Am I watching my own body? Do you know what I mean? There's so many questions to time travel that
yeah.
I think it's just safer to sit here at 41 with back pain.
Yeah. I would be okay if I was sent back as an observer. Like if I could go back and watch myself, maybe that's really narcissistic, but almost as a way of understanding maybe like key decision points from the perspective of as if I was watching a film of my life, but I could be in that space because I think there's I don't feel like I've got a very good memory. And, and so when I think about 18, whatever that means, I think about particular moments, but I can't really remember what it felt like. I can't really remember but maybe if I went back and was part of that for a couple of days, but then so what? Who cares? No, I don't think I could be paid either.
Yeah, I mean, I look at what 20-year-olds have to go through today, and I'm genuinely I don't know how they do it. I don't know how they do it. But then I think back to what I was like in my 20s, and it's, I didn't have to deal with social media. I existed in first year of our college with no, Bebo or anything like that, and I got to be a drunken mess in terrible outfits. And there exists very little photographic evidence, and that's my personal photographic evidence that I don't have to
Yeah.
show anyone. So,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
the concept of, I mean, God, some of the stuff I did, which was not my finest hour, it remains that way. It just, you know, so yeah, I don't think I'd like to go back.
So I'm going to save the archive for when you come back. And I hope you do, because I don't want to try and like cram it into 5 minutes. But I wonder, from the perspective of that older version of yourself, what do you think an archive of your life would look like?
It's so funny you should ask me this question because I have been toying with the concept of this because I am, for all the talking I do to people about save everything, don't put anything in the bin, don't throw away anything, I have done exactly that in my own life. So I'm having to get better at like saving, if I go and do a talk somewhere, I'll try and save a leaflet or a flyer or whatever so that when I am older, I can look back on it. But one thing I have been very like toying with is the concept of delving into a memoir around my journalism because I've been a journalist for what 2000 2018, just under 20 years ish, give or take, and I've worked in everything from cannabis and psychedelics to sex tech and sex writing to local news to sports to politics or yeah, covering general elections. And I think at pivotal points in the most recent history within journalism as well, like we were talking about earlier, the collapse of, the kind of easy, I quote unquote, pre social media era of journalism, the going in as a 24-hour news person, and I, yeah, I'm giving serious thought to writing my experiences down because certainly when I came out of one particular publication, I sat and made a list of all the weird things because journalism is a weird job. It is a weird, weird job. You are running from person to person to person, and it's like I cannot explain some of the like. I mean, I've genuinely held like human bones in my hand twice on two separate occasions as a journalist. Like how illegally, I should add.
I mean, once is like, lucky, twice is deliberate.
Choice is weird, but it's things like that. It's like meeting celebrities that you would never in a million years think that you would get the opportunity to, and like realizing that some of them are just dicks, some of them
I
are
mean,
also
I'm not going to
nice.
ask who the dickest one was. Who was your favorite?
So I think my favorite was John Lydon from the Sex Pistols
Wow. Okay.
and
Wow.
Patti Smith, the Patti Smith. Like I interviewed loads of like celebrities that are more famous, more like in terms of like more kind of recent, like Ollie Alexander and people like that. Like, but for me, my love of music and, it 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and a little bit 90s as well, if I'm honest. But, I grew up on their music and to meet both of them, like, I mean, I met Patti Smith, but I interviewed Lydon over, can't remember if it was Zoom or phone call now, but it was around the time where he was coming to Nottingham to perform at Rock City in 2022, 2023. And honestly, for someone that has been interviewed, God, I mean, Jesus, I was probably like his sixth interview that day. He was so warm and friendly and lovely and chatty. And I know he's a controversial figure. I know some people love him, some people hate him. I know sometimes he comes out with some stuff where you think, ooh, but like he was talking to me about Ireland. He was talking about how much he loved his wife because she was alive at that point and really wasn't very well, and he was her carer. And it was just it's still to this day one of those interviews that just will I will treasure that. Yeah, never thought I would ever have that experience ever, to be honest.
I don't agree with the whole like never meet your heroes thing because it sets you as responsible for them Whereas I think, yeah, meet your heroes. If it turns out they are a dick, that's on them, not you. You can still appreciate something about them if you want to. But I mean, I say that I'm terrible with, if I meet celebrities, I just turn into a complete muppet and I say the worst things. And I end up walking away and going, don't ever do that again. But
Oh my God, I will tell you the worst one that I did, and I cringe to this day about it. I won't say who it was, but it was mainly because it was an Irish TV presenter. So I don't even know if I can remember his name, but we we got the invite to go to the launch of this holiday show on, I think it was like TV3 or something like that in Dublin, and myself and my friend went, and we had a great time, and I basically said, because there was on the clock and off the clock event, right? And an on the clock event is, you are reporting it, you have to interview people, you have to be on best behavior, so you can't drink or eat because you obviously can't be drunk. You can't have a mouthful of food when a PR grabs you and goes, you need to interview this person now. And you have to be seen to be, because at that point, I worked predominantly in fashion. So it was like, don't eat anything. You can't be seen to be enjoying food, God forbid. So you would sneak hors d'oeuvres in the corner when no one could see you. But so an off the clock event was, I got an invite to something that I don't have to write up for whatever publication or radio or whatever it is. So we can drink, we can eat, we can, just enjoy ourselves. But so we'd gone to this event and we didn't pay any attention to it. We didn't properly read the press release. I didn't have anything prepared. I didn't have anything, I hadn't a clue who any of it was. I just was just there. And next minute, the PR goes, "Oh, great, you're here," and like grabs me and sits me down in front of the presenter and goes, "Right, you've got 10 minutes to do your interview and get your piece." And I was like, oh my God, I've got nothing prepared. I don't know who this guy is. I have no idea. So I believe my opening words to him were, "Hey, yeah, it's you." And he's like, "It's me." And I was like, "I know." And you're that guy. And he goes, "Yeah." And I was like, "The guy off the telly." And he was like, "Yeah." It was downhill from there. But if that ever happens to you and there's a free bar, it's all uphill from there.
I mean, I'll take that
Further
advice
down.
because I'm so terrible. I just can't do it. And I would be the person who wouldn't even know how to begin with, "It's you." I'd probably have turned up with the vol au vent still in my mouth going, "Who are you?" But anyway, you're much better at that than I am. That's why
Oh
you're a
God.
professional.
I wouldn't have said professional in that moment. I would have said absolute like scam artist, because I was in it for the free goods, like handful of hors d'oeuvres in one, and do you know what I mean? Like at least four like prosecco's in the other, all balanced in the fingers, like, and trying to like slide a goodie bag into my handbag and all the rest of it. So disgraceful.
So I will need to invite you back on because I really want at some point to hear more about the Queer Archive, which is, I think, in how we were introduced and met in the first place. And we haven't even talked a bit about it. And it feels so vibrant and vital. So I would love to have you back and talk about that.
I would love that. So yes,
Thank you.
please.
I'd really appreciate that. And the question I ask everyone to close a conversation is, the title of my book is Still Here, Still Queer, Now What? So if you were to finish the sentence, I'm still here, I'm still queer, and what would you finish it with?
Gosh, that's a really difficult one. Still here, I'm still queer. And somehow I've got through it all, because there are so many points of my life where I've thought, that's it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've lost my job, or my careers, it feels a bit like there are no jobs out there. Or I'm tired, I'm burnt out. I can't continue on at this speed. You know, who's going to want to marry me? Who's going to want to, the fact that I'm still here, I'm still queer, but mostly I'm still here. I'm still like, there are some things that I have been through that I genuinely thought would defeat me. Like, and for some reason I'm still here. I haven't quite reached the final level, the boss level yet. So I've still got like a lot of like stuff to go. But, yeah, it feels really good to have come out the other side of all of that. And I think every single time that I get knocked back, like, the manuscript doesn't get accepted, or, you know, I have a bad meeting or whatever like that, I'm able to go, you know what, you've been through worse and you've come out and you've properly come out as well. I didn't come out to my 30s. So to be both of those things, yeah, fuck it. I'll take it.
I'm glad you're still here. I'm glad that you've had a life that's very full already. And to me, that just means there's so much more to come. Like, and maybe even the best is yet to come. You know, that feeling of everything that you've been through so far is just teeing you up for what comes next. And I think that's so exciting.
Me too. Me too.
If people wanted to find, well, if you wanted to be found, if people wanted to learn more about you, about your work, about if they wanted to, I don't know, just give you some money and say, would you like to be 20 again? Where would people find you?
Well, yeah, anyone with a time machine can get in touch with me. If you want to find me as a person, I'm at CJ De Barra on pretty much everything because very sadly, I have given in to capitalism and I'm on every single platform you can imagine. You can buy my books if you wish to support me financially, and that is Neuroqueer, a neurodivergent guide to love, sex, and everything in between. There's also the Queer Nottingham books as well, which are available, all of which are available online through bookshops and all the rest of it. But should you want to have a look at the archive, you can head to the Not Queer History archive again on all the platforms, because apparently I very much dislike having time off. So if you want to find me, those are the best places to head to. And I'm forever advertising events that I'm going to speak at and sometimes to not speak at, but like play a nice film or something on Instagram.
Amazing. I feel exactly the same. It's like, oh, I hate social media. And then I go, okay, I better go and update my 27 different platforms.
This is
But
it.
there we
Like,
are.
where does it end? Where does it end?
The irony of late stage capitalism. Thank you so much. I've loved this time with you and I
Oh,
can't wait
me
for even
too.
more.
Me too. Thank you.